Uh, so the topic tonight was, is it okay to laugh? Can good Catholics laugh? And especially at a time when we have crazy things going on in our world, that happens in our personal lives, that happens publicly, and things like right now. Um, is it okay to be funny? Is it okay to have joy in the midst of great sorrow? And so I have some ideas to share with you, but I want to let you know that if you're expecting like a stand-up comedy, that's not going to be tonight. Catch me on another night. Maybe we'll do that then. This is more of a reflection. So to think about some things, and you can join me and think about them too. And we'll see some funny stories from the lives of the saints, some funny stories from the Gospels, from the Scriptures. But is it okay to laugh? When I was thinking about this topic, I remembered September 11th, 2001. And I remember one of the first things that I did was to gather with a group of young adults at St. Francis Cabrini. And as we came together to pray together, to process what was going on in the world, and try and figure out what would happen next, I was reading the biography of St. Francis Cabrini, and was just really struck that her perspective about doing things when she was afraid to do them. She was absolutely terrified of water, but she crossed the Pacific Ocean over 8 times in her life. And just an attitude of what happens when God is behind us, what we can do. And I like to read a lot of C.S. Lewis, and in that perspective, he urges us to think about the eternal perspective a lot. To think of the big picture of things. And I remember in that young adult group, we were thinking about the tragedy of the towers collapsing, and trying to take in the scope of that. Trying to take in the idea of that. And I thought how lucky those people might be right now. And somebody was absolutely ticked off that I would say that. They were just angry with me, that I could consider that death could be a good thing for someone. How could that possibly be? How could that possibly be something that's good? Something that's how could we take that angle on that? And in our limited worldview, in our limited lives, we see this snapshot of right here, right now. We experience difficulty. From an eternal perspective, I pray for the end of the world every single day. When we pray the Our Father, we say, "Thy kingdom come." And when those people passed through the veil, when those people stepped into eternity, they could have been beholding the beatific vision at that moment. That they could have been with God in that instant. And how much better that would be from the greatest joy that we experience here on earth. That's a hard perspective to grapple with when we're in the midst of an epidemic, when we're in the midst of a plague. But Easter time is exactly the time when we think about those kinds of things. Death doesn't have the final word. It's said of the early Christian church, they would get together on Easter Monday to tell jokes. They would get together on Easter Monday to think about reasons for joy, because the greatest joy that could ever happen happened to them then, what J.R.R. Tolkien calls the eucatastrophe. When things seem the darkest, when things seem the worst, that there's sudden turn of events, this happening that you couldn't expect, that you couldn't have foreseen, that you couldn't anticipate, that leaves you with a joy that's unspeakable, that leaves you with a feeling that everything is brighter, everything is more beautiful in that moment. And that's exactly, I think, what Easter morning was. And so the early Christians would get together on Easter Monday to tell jokes some of the early church fathers, Gregory of Nyssa, John Chrysostom, St. Augustine, thought about things like that. So I wanted to just read a couple. I don't like to read long quotes, but there's a couple really, really cool quotes that I shared with Mary in thinking through this. Is it okay to laugh right now? She said, you should read those. So you can blame Mary for this. But a quote that we've all heard this time of year, if not this year, you probably heard it last year, the year before. We are an Easter people and Alleluia is our song. Who said that? Everybody thinks John Paul II. St. Augustine was the first one to say it. John Paul II was quoting St. Augustine. And there's a couple different speeches that John Paul II quoted that, but in particular on his Angelus on November 30th in 1986, John Paul II said this: "We do not pretend that life is all beauty. We are aware of darkness and sin, of poverty and pain. But we know Jesus has conquered sin and passed through his own pain to the glory of the resurrection. And we live in the light of his paschal mystery, the mystery of his death and resurrection. We are an Easter people, and Alleluia is our song. We are not looking for a shallow joy, but rather a joy that comes from faith, that grows through unselfish love, that respects the fundamental duty of love of neighbor, without which it would be unbecoming to speak of joy. We realize that joy is demanding. It demands unselfishness. It demands a readiness to say with Mary, be it done with me according to thy word." I love that. I love pretty much anything that John Paul II said or wrote. I love to think of right now when things are difficult. I've experienced at this moment in my life, in my own personal life, in my own personal walk, some very difficult struggles, some difficult things. And at this time, as in other times in my life, there's times when people are offended by my levity. And right now I've had some people who see my attempt to break them out of gloominess, to break them from their anger, their everyday darkness. They think it's an attempt to take them down, an attempt to demean them, to make them small. And I think that Easter joy, that kind of joy that John Paul II talked about, that self-giving love that we find joy in, is kind of joy that demeans people. It's not the kind of joy that mocks. It's not the kind of joy that laughs at someone. But it's the kind of joy that looks at the world around us and says, whoa, there's something amazing going on. There's something big going on. Here's another little quote for you. Another personal favorite. Little guy that wrote 100 years ago, G.K. Chesterton. In his book Orthodoxy, he wasn't quite Catholic at that time, but he was starting to really embrace the truth of the Catholic faith, and he always saw the world kind of with a sacramental worldview, that through the things of this world we can find joy. And Chesterton said that angels can fly because they take themselves lightly. That's always been the instinct of Christendom, that angels fly because they take themselves lightly. He goes on a little bit farther down in that quote that he says, pride cannot rise to levity. Pride is the downward drag of all things into an easy solemnity. One settles down into a sort of selfish seriousness. One has to rise to a self-forgetfulness. A man falls into a brown study, but he reaches up at a blue sky. Seriousness is not a virtue. Seriousness is a vice. It's a natural trend or lapse into taking oneself gravely because it's the easy thing to do. It's much easier to write a good Times leading article than a good joke in Punch. For solemnity flows out of men naturally, but laughter is a leap. It's easy to be heavy, hard to be light. Satan fell by the force of gravity. That's what Chesterton had to say about it. He said that the people that take themselves too seriously, they're the paranoids. They're the people they're the really smart people. They can really think things through rigorously, but they take themselves too seriously. So that reminds me, one of the guys I wanted to share with you about, one of my personal favorites, is St. Philip Neri. For those of you that are just now being introduced to St. Philip Neri, he was one of the reformers at the time of the Catholic reform that happened just after the Protestant revolt, what the world commonly calls the Protestant Reformation, but really it was a revolt against what Christianity was. And he lived in Rome the same time as great reformers like Charles Borromeo, Pope Pius V. This was the same time in the world that the Battle of Lepanto was happening. Saint Teresa of Avila was in Spain with Saint John of the Cross, and over in the New World we had Our Lady of Guadalupe doing amazing things with Juan Diego, and all these amazing people that were alive at the same time, and so many of them knew each other and their paths crossed. Saint Ignatius of Loyola was alive at the same time. But Philip Neri was in Rome. He wanted to be a missionary, but he never got the chance. He found that Rome was to be his India. And when he was in his early 20s, before he became a priest, he would commonly make the pilgrimage to the major churches in Rome. And then he would spend the night praying in the catacombs. And on the vigil of Pentecost, I believe he was in his mid-20s. On the vigil of Pentecost, he was praying in the catacombs of St. Stephen and had this experience that I think are a lot of times like the experience of the mystics. We misunderstand them. It's hard to put these kinds of things into words. It's hard to really find the right phrasing to even express it in poetry, to put these kinds of things into words that make sense, these kinds of experiences. But the best way he could describe it was that there was like an orb, something glowing, that entered into the catacombs, and he saw this come towards him, and it came at him, and it entered into his chest, and he felt this warmth, he felt this growth, he felt this becoming larger. And from that moment, for the rest of his life, he lived into his late 80s, died of natural causes as an old man. For the rest of his life, for over that would be over 60 years, there was a heat that emanated from his chest. Even in the winter time when it would be snowing, he would walk around sometimes without a shirt on. And it was testified by a number of witnesses at that when Philip Neri was deep in prayer, the furniture in the room would vibrate to the palpitations of his heart. From that moment in his 20s, when he had this experience on the vigil of Pentecost, he had this supernatural joy that emanated out from him, and his whole life was marked by this joyfulness, and that's what made him such a good reformer. He was a traditionalist. He was someone that brought back things from the old school church that the Protestant reformers wanted to get away with, and do away with, that some of the priesthood that needed reform had forgotten. And the hallmark of his life, the hallmark of his ministry, and his joy, he's sometimes called the apostle of joy, was humility. And he loved to teach his spiritual sons and daughters humility. He founded the Congregation of the Oratory. The most famous member that we know of today is Saint John Henry Newman. But Philip Neri would teach humility in fun ways. That he would, when he noticed that someone was a good preacher, someone gave a beautiful, excellent, eloquent speech, he said, "That was really, really good. I want you to give that same speech the next time you preach for the next 10 months." And so this guy who was like a really good preacher for the next 10 months gave just that same homily over and over, so that when people would see him, they're like, oh, here's this guy who only has one good talk. But that was his way of learning to be humble, of learning humility. He would send some of the acolytes, some of the people studying for the priesthood, some of the seminarians into town to buy wine and cheese, wearing these big goofy glasses. I don't know what kind of glasses they had in the 16th century, but he would send them into town almost in Groucho Marx glasses, kinds of things, to just make them feel humiliated. And he was a guy who, by the end of his life, it was known that he was a living saint, kind of like John Paul II, kind of like Mother Teresa. People knew miraculous things happen around him all the time. And he got embarrassed by it. When a miracle would occur in his presence, he'd try and play it off with a joke. He'd try and cover up with a joke and get the attention off of himself. And so when cardinals would come to his study to learn from him, this living saint, this great person, when he found out that they were coming to visit, he would have his students pull the joke books from the bookshelves and just read to him from the joke books. And he's like, you see the kind of stuff I love? You see the kind of great learning that I have here, the kind of books that I'm listening to? He would sometimes be drawn upwards. This happened to Teresa of Avila a lot too. She's one of my heroes, one of my spiritual mentors, that when drawn into a moment of prayer and forgetful of self, the soul would almost be drawn upwards, away from that graveness, that seriousness, that gravity, and they would experience what we call levitation. These kind of thing actually happens, and they would lift up off of the ground. Some saints were told that they can't levitate anymore, like Saint Joseph of Cupertino. We're told that they can't do these kinds of things anymore because it was scaring people, it was freaking people out. And when this sort of thing would happen to Philip Neri, when he was at Mass, or he was around the Eucharist, or he was around sacred objects, he didn't want it to happen. It would just kind of take over. And he would experience this levity, this lifting. And so to distract himself, he would hire a barber to come and cut his hair in the middle of Mass. And he would do these weird things just to distract himself or to distract the people around him, so that he wouldn't just start levitating in the middle of prayer. I love that. Is it okay to laugh? If we understand humility, if we understand the big picture, if we understand that death doesn't have the last word, absolutely. Even in the Bible, it says, "He who sits on the throne laughs." There's some funny stories. I'm sure you've all heard about Balaam, who was supposed to curse the Israelites, and he was brought out to curse them, and he couldn't do it. Even on his way to go up to the hillside to overlook the Israelite camp and to pronounce the curse on them, and his donkey turned away 3 times because his donkey wouldn't see the angel, and he beat his angel. And so it's one of my favorite quotes in the Bible. Book of Numbers, chapter 22, verse 32. And the angel of the Lord said to him, "Why have you beat your ass these 3 times?" Just pull that one out of your pocket sometime, and totally out of context. If you're looking for a good wedding gift, when King David wanted to marry Saul's daughter, Michal, Saul thought that he could do away with David by saying, "The only thing that I'll take as a marriage gift is the foreskin of 100 Philistines." So David went and attacked the Philistine camp, and he got 200 foreskins and brought them fresh from the battlefield to Saul, and that was his dowry so that he could marry his daughter. I think God has a sense of humor. That's one of the things that Chesterton always said about Jesus. I believe it's at the end of his book, The Everlasting Man. He says one of the things that's that's hidden from us, that's hidden from us in Jesus's life, was, we saw when he wept. We saw when he got angry and made a whip and drove people from the temple. But one of the things that was too much for us, one of the things that would have overwhelmed us, was probably his laughter. And so we never see a moment in the Gospels when Jesus laughs, because Chesterton thinks that maybe that would just be too much for us. Maybe that would overwhelm us. There's more I could say. There's definitely more to be said, but I don't want to bore everybody with just talking and talking and talking. Anything that I have to share with you, there's nothing new. I have no, and if I did have a new gospel, if I did have a new story to share with you, you should be worried, you should be concerned. Any of these stories, any one of you could look up for yourself. Any of these things that bring us levity, it's not a new thought. It's not something I'm giving you. This is our faith. This is what the church has given us for, going back even beyond Christian times, even back as you can see in the Old Testament story, some of the funny things. So I want to maybe see what other people think. What if anybody has any questions? If anybody has a comment, if anybody has a good story of a saint that just cracks you up, that makes you laugh, that you want to share. I don't know how you want to do that, Mary, but if anybody wants to put that in the chat. And one of the reasons why I have for my background the Saint Benedict medal, that's become one of my personal favorite prayers, is the letters around the outside are a prayer in Latin that's a powerful prayer of exorcism, but the last three letters are the IVB. You can see, let's see, over on this side of me, the IV, and then the B would be up there. Ipse venena bibas. Drink the poison yourself. It's a prayer to Satan. Get behind me. What you offer me is just vanities. What you offer me is evil. Drink the poison yourself. I love that. I love that kind of prayer. I think St. Philip Neri would have probably prayed that himself. He didn't have the Benedict medal that we have today. That was cast in the 1800s, but I'm sure he read St. Benedict. Yeah, just looking at the comments, and someone says that that they wanted to share anonymously that the joy that they've had in their life is because of their family, having a great family. Someone else was saying Francis Selos. Funny you should mention him. Francis Selos is he's right here with us today. So says he joined a laughing club. The point was to tell jokes and then to stop laughing when a signal was given, and Selos couldn't stop laughing. So he earned rosaries as a punishment and ended up leaving the group. Saint Francis Selos, blessed Francis Selos, is a good saint for us to remember right now too, I think, because of the experience that he had with yellow fever, similar to the coronavirus. He spent the last days of his life in New Orleans administering to the sick dying of yellow fever in a plague that struck that part of the country in the mid-19th century, the time that President Lincoln was in charge. The same time that St. Bernadette would have been talking to Mary and Lourdes. And Francis Selos gave his life he contracted yellow fever. So Blessed Francis Silos, pray for us in this time of coronavirus.
Brad, I thought Alex's comment was interesting. That he said, didn't one of St. Benedict's rule, no laughter? Do you, how would you respond to St. Benedict?
I think for Benedict in the monastic life that they lived, that kind of discipline served them well. One of the things I love about the saints is they're so different. That's one of the things that C.S. Lewis loved about the saints. He says, look at all the tyrants, all the dictators in the world, and they're all the same. They're all like each other. But one of the things about the saints is they're so different. Their own personalities come out so much. And I wouldn't be surprised if that was a rule for Benedict. And I think there are certain occasions where it's appropriate to have that kind of discipline, to maybe not outwardly display your levity. Certainly not the case with Philip Neri. Certainly hasn't been the case in my own life.
Nice. And Brad, wasn't Frassati also quite the jokester?
From what I understand, that's one of the things that attracted people to Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati. One of the things that attracted people to Saint Francis of Assisi as well was their wit. Their quick wit. They're able, and I think a quick wit, a sharp wit can be cutting, that we see in some comics today when it's used to bring someone down. But I think the most intelligent people are able to have the kind of quick wit to, and it takes a good deal of observation. I wouldn't be surprised if Thomas Aquinas had a good wit because of his ability to observe things. That's what makes people like Seinfeld so funny. Is their ability to see observation. And I think that was true. That was probably the case with Pier Giorgio, that he would notice things about people. And he's very, very human, it's kind of like Teresa of Avila, one of my own favorites. She had a great wit too. She was told that one time, I don't know if this is true or not. So many great stories about saints. I can't find good source material. I always like to go for good source material and make sure it's accurate. One of the stories that we have of Teresa, and I hope it's true, it fits her personality for sure, was that she was traveling to her several convents that she had founded, and got knocked off of her horse into the mud. And she said, God, if this is how you treat your friends, it's no wonder you have so few of them.
Yes, I love that one. That's awesome. Brad, I thought Annie had a really good question too. She was asking, what are some, looking to the saints and hearing some of these stories, some of them had even more serious trauma and sufferings that they were enduring. But so for us in our own lives right now, what are some real or realistic ways we can seek out levity in our, I don't know how to say this word, quarantining?
Yeah. Definitely, there's other saints that we can learn from. That it's difficult for me to wrap my mind around, but I've certainly learned a lot from those that we call victim souls. Saints like Saint Therese of Lisieux, Saint Padre Pio, Saint Gemma Galgani. Several of those mystics had the experience of the stigmata in some way. Saint Gemma experienced the scourging every Thursday night. No one ever knew about it during her lifetime except for her adoptive mother and her spiritual director. And her spiritual director wrote about it in his biography of her. But their ability to take the kind of suffering that they had and make it a prayer, that Saint Gemma was given the special grace to know that the suffering she was experienced at certain moments, she was given the grace to know who uh, that prayer was assisting at times, that it was for the conversion of this particular person, or that it was to assist this particular individual in a time of need. And I like to think that maybe Saint Gemma knew me, that God outside of time could know of us now, even back at the different different times that saints lived. But to learn about how they took their suffering and made a prayer of that, definitely another big lesson for us, I think, to take in the time when we find our own suffering.
Absolutely, thank you. These stories are great in the comments. Keep them coming.
Yeah, and so someone just asked actually about, is turning suffering into a joke a way of making it a prayer? Mm-hmm. I think that recognizing our suffering is real. That's one of the things that they say about Blessed Chiara, that as she was dying, refused the pain medications because she wanted to feel the suffering and wanted to be able to offer that as prayer. I know that something similar could be said about Saint Gemma. To make it into a joke wouldn't be. I think if it's totally to turn our attention away from it, that can be medicine. Laughter can be a medicine in that sense. But to recognize that death doesn't have the last word. That's that our suffering makes sense when it's united with Christ. The only reason that any evil at all, that any evil whatsoever is ever allowed to exist in the world, if God really is all powerful and all good, and God really is love, the only reason that any evil exists is that some greater good will come of it. And that's how we turn our suffering into a prayer. Oh, I love that St. Lawrence quote. Yeah, somebody mentioned him. St. Lawrence was a martyr, burned at the stake. Turn me over, I'm down on this side. I believe St. Christina the Astonishing is another one that she sat up. She sat up in her coffin and said, came back to life. People were freaking out. Another great story that I wanted to share was his feast day was very recently during the month of April, early April. Saint Vincent Ferrer, another great Dominican saint, lived in same time as all these other people, 16th century. And Saint Vincent Ferrer was someone that so many miracles happened around him in his life too, that his spiritual director actually said, don't do this anymore. No more miracles without permission, okay? Stop working miracles unless you have permission directly from your spiritual director. And so he was walking past the construction site and one of the workers was falling from the building and he said, hold it right there. And the guy was suspended in midair while he went and found his spiritual director and said, can I help him? The director said, yeah, you can go help him. And he was let down to the ground, gently survived it. Again, I don't have source material on that story. I hope it's true. Certainly fitting in the life of St. Vincent Ferrer. So any other questions that would be fitting? And I also think it's kind of funny that, I'm doing Theology on Tap. I don't know if you noticed what I have here is my Stranger Things mug. Mornings are for coffee and contemplation. Because I've been straight edge for over 3 years. not a bit of alcohol for at least 3 years. So welcome to Theology on Tap.
That's awesome. Okay, Greg is going to share a funny, I don't know if it's a saint meme or if it's just a funny meme to make a levity during this time. So Greg, whenever you're ready, you can share it. And feel free to keep the questions coming in the chat too.
Oh yeah, I saw that one today.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Greg. Love it. Very cool. Well, Brad, what are some of your favorite books that you'd recommend for us that can, entertain our mind?
I definitely have a stack of books right next to me. I think one of the best books for understanding is this little gem right here, the Tolkien Reader. If you want his essay on fairy stories, his idea of the eucatastrophe, that the Lord of the Rings is definitely one of those stories that brings the archetypes, the great, a great mythology of the Catholic worldview to life, and how the simple people are the real heroes. We see that in the lives of the saints all the time. The simple ones are the ones that bring the great message. Look at Fatima, look at Lourdes, look at so many of these heroes that we have. Look at Peter, these goofballs, the sons of thunder, the apostles. But that idea of eucatastrophe, and how the myth and good stories speak to our heart because they remind us of when the one story that we want the most to be true actually did happen, and that's the resurrection. There's a great book on Philip Neri. There's a couple of good biographies of Philip Neri. I think the best one is called The Apostle of Joy, and it's something about fire. I couldn't find it in my bookshelves. One of the bad things about having great books, I loan them off to people and then I don't remember who has them and I never see them again. So I think my best biography of Philip Neri ran away. Of course, G.K. Chesterton, Orthodoxy, The Everlasting Man, some good thoughts. C.S. Lewis, his collection of articles called The Weight of Glory. And that particular essay, The Weight of Glory, is definitely good reading to give inspiration on the eternal perspective. That we're so hung up on this moment of suffering right now. But if we could really see what's really going on, if we could really understand, C.S. Lewis says it's like, we're like kids playing in the slums, playing in the mud because they can't understand the idea of a holiday at the beach. They've never, someone who's never had that experience. Something so much better awaits us, and we are hung up in this one moment right now. And there's something so much bigger going on. So The Weight of Glory is definitely a good one to keep in mind for that perspective. If you want a good collection of stories of saints that kind of explores some of the outlandish stories, some of the bigger, like, wait a minute, did that really happen kind of stories? And some of them there is solid source material for, but some of them, we just have to take it on the word of someone's word of someone's word. But a good collection of those is a book by Bert Gezi called Mystics and Miracles. I think it was Loyola Press that published that one. Bert Gezi writes a lot for Our Sunday Visitor as well. He has a couple saints anthologies. Voices of the Saints is another one that he has, that lots of good stories there. Frank Sheed put together a good collection of stories of saints. Frank Sheed, one of my personal heroes, was about 100 years ago in England was a street preacher who would go out into the Hyde Park and other parks, big public parks in England, and debate atheists and have public debates. And the collection of his 50 years of street preaching and studying theology is one of the classics of theology. You can't find a better, is Theology and Sanity. But Frank Sheed put together a good collection of saints called Saints Are Not Sad. Took 40 small essays of people from the time, stories of saints. Saints are not sad.
That is awesome. Brad, my friend Mark has a quote he wants to read that's relevant. Mark, yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I thought of a quote from Pope Francis as you were talking, because I know I struggle with faking joy. I want to be authentic. And there is a quote from Evangelii Gaudium, the joy of the gospel, that it stood out to me a while ago. So I searched it back up, and it helps me a lot to realize I always have the certainty of being loved by God, and that's my reason for joy, even if it looks different in different seasons of life. So it says, there are Christians whose lives seem like Lent without Easter. I realize, of course, that joy is not expressed the same way at all times in life, especially at moments of great difficulty. Joy adapts and changes, but always endures, even as a flicker of light born of our personal certainty that when everything is said and done, we are infinitely loved. I understand the grief of people who have to endure great suffering, yet slowly but surely we all have to let the joy of faith slowly revive as a quiet yet firm trust, even amidst the greatest distress. So that quote, or some semblance of that joy looks different in different seasons of life, has been something I go back to. I want to be authentic about struggle, but realize I always have a reason for joy. So.
Thank you. Someone asked about the Apostle of Joy. I just looked it up. It's called Philip Neri, The Fire of Joy by Paul Turks. The Fire of Philip Neri, The Fire of Joy, is one of the best biographies out there on Philip Neri.
Awesome.
He was a practical joker, liked to pull pranks on other people.
Great. Well, if there are any other questions, feel free to submit them. Brad, I really enjoyed that when we were talking about tonight, the simple comment of like, have we ever imagined what Jesus's laughter sounded like? And I love that idea of even just taking to prayer, like, what did Jesus's laugh sound like? Like, God created laughter, he created joy. And
yeah, I said that was from maybe The Everlasting Man. I actually found the quote. It's actually the very last paragraph in Orthodoxy. At the end of Orthodoxy, to quote that straight from Chesterton, he says, as I close this chaotic volume, I open again the strange small book from which all Christianity came, and I am again haunted by a kind of confirmation. The tremendous figure which fills the Gospels towers in this respect, as in every other, above all the thinkers who ever thought themselves tall. His pathos was natural, almost casual. The Stoics, ancient and modern, were proud of concealing their tears. He never concealed his tears. He showed them plainly on his open face at any daily sight, such as the far side of his native city. Yet he concealed something. Solemn supermen and imperial diplomatists, okay, yeah, that's a word that Chesterton used, are proud of restraining their anger. He never restrained his anger. He flung furniture down the front steps of the temple and asked men how they expected to escape the damnation of hell. Yet he restrained something. I say it with reverence. There was in that shattering personality a thread that must be called a shyness. There was something that he hid from all men when he went up a mountain to pray. There was something that he covered constantly by abrupt silence or impetuous isolation. There was some one thing that was too great for God to show us when he walked upon our earth. And I have sometimes fancied that it was his mirth.
So good. I love it. Thank you. All right. Well, if there's any other questions, Brad, we're gonna give you a virtual clap. So hold on. All right. Round of applause. Thank you, Brad. That was wonderful. Thanks for reminding us of the fun of our saints. Yes, I love that, Meg. High five. How about one more final cheers before we head out for the night? Brad, someone asked if you could take the book list. So maybe you can send me the book list and I'll post it on the Facebook event so people could follow up with some of those books.
Sure. I said a lot of things. I say a lot of things. I don't always remember what I said. So I'll try and remember what they all were.
Awesome. Thank you. Wait.
But none of my stories are new. None of my stories are novel. They've been around for hundreds and hundreds of years.
And that last quote was from Orthodoxy, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. All right, well, one more cheers. And there we go. And thank you everyone for joining. We're gonna have an upcoming talent show, so get ready for that. That's going to be a blast. And stay connected. There'll be some fun events and some beautiful times for prayer and reflection over the next couple of weeks. So join the newsletter, check out Facebook. Brad, thank you so much. Happy Easter, everybody. Let us be Easter people. Alleluia is our song. And have a great night in Easter octave. God bless.